6:34. Let's go head into the KUAM News Zoom room where we have standing by the legislative oversight of procurement, among other things. No labor, rev, and tax, and the environment. Senator Sabina Perez. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Sabina, and good morning to the listening audience. And good morning to Attorney Brown. Thank you.
Right, and she's also joined by Attorney John Thomas Brown, who literally, quite literally, wrote the book on procurement for the government of Guam. He teaches the procurement class over the GCC, so when you hear somebody come on and say, oh, so-and-so has got to go take the procurement or whatever, he's where they go to take the procurement. So he's kind of an expert.
Just a little bit.
Right, and so, Bree, we brought them on relative to the scathing audit that was released by the Office of the Public Auditor, B.J. Cruz, and I think one of the big takeaways, and this was relative to, they didn't name any names or facilities, but it was pretty much relative to the first round of procurement, air quotes there, of the quarantine facilities, and it involved largely the attempted procurement that was conducted by the former legal counsel and son-in-law of Governor Lulian Guerrero, Hai Yun. And so if you guys recall last year, this was quite a thing. There was an oversight hearing. It was really a real hot-button issue, and there were some casualties. We saw the resignation of the former chief of staff, Tony Babauta. We also saw Attorney Hyun actually leave the legal counsel post, And so here we are with this audit, $3 million in question quarantine costs. Senator, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we also saw that marathon oversight hearing led by Senator Sabina Perez. And like you said, so here we are, Senator. This audit is out. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it definitely brings flashbacks of that oversight hearing. Had to go back and review some of those transcripts and documents. So yeah, what this audit really does, it affirms what was said in the, what was found in the oversight hearing, that procurement law was not followed for the first procurement of quarantine and isolation facilities. And that procurement, because procurement law wasn't followed, there were some issues that arose from it. And one of them is of course, the idea of lack of a contract, payment without a contract. There are other issues of lack of procurement records. So in looking at the documents that were submitted, so there was this issue where Office of Homeland Security was in charge of procuring the quarantine facilities, and when the time came for that to be done around the time when Duterte closed their borders, the procurement hadn't been done, and so the Office of the Governor took it upon themselves to proceed without involving the Chief Procurement Officer. And so things kind of really went awry from that point. And so in looking at some of the documents that were sent, there was a lot of backtracking that was done. So the records had to be filled. Somehow they had to be filled, but currently, according to the OPA, the public auditor, they still don't have any proper procurement record to show for any of the transactions that occurred. The other thing that came up was conflict of interest. That was noted in the OPA audit. That is a serious issue, when dealing with government funds, and perhaps there's a potential for gaining any financial benefit with any kind of contracting with government funding. That is a serious concern for me, especially. And then also incomplete procurement records. Those are so important to ensure that we're following the guidelines, the government guidelines of ensuring that the public trust is ensured in regards to protecting the funds, the government funds. And the other thing was contract issues. So the idea that contracts are being extended beyond what was directed by the governor, according to the audit. It's good to know that things have changed since that point. So now things are going through GSA. Although the governor's office still holds firm that they have the legal right to do emergency purchases outside of procurement law. And also the fact that yeah, I think there's still issues that need to be cleared up as far as procurement record. That's an ongoing problem. And I think a lot of that can be addressed by ensuring that there is the proper personnel are in charge of procurement, for one thing, and that there's enough personnel. I think capacity is such a big issue when it comes to getting these procurements done in a timely fashion. The other issue I think that was brought up in the oversight hearing was the rescinding of rules. And to me, that's a huge problem, because there wasn't any delineation of which rules were being rescinded and the impacts of that. So obviously procurement law was one of them, but were there other ones that were rescinded? And again, that all ties to how the government's money is being used. That is a serious concern and issue.
But what do you make, though? Because we did ask the governor her reaction to this audit. I think it was the day after it was released, and she essentially said that she and her people did nothing wrong. She was following her executive order, and the Emergency Health Powers Act gave her the power to do what she did, the superpowers, and it was affirmed by the Supreme Court.
I contend differently. Obviously, they have their legal interpretation of the Health Powers Act, but that nothing in that law states anything about procurement of quarantine facilities, and it says to basically the law. I mean, maybe perhaps Attorney Brown could step in here because he's more of the authority of this, but the idea is that purchases, they relied on this term purchases, which is nowhere defined. The idea that one can take a different route from a procurement law really opens up ourselves to perhaps more harm than good. And even if they have the intent of speeding up the process, to me, that it wasn't really clarified if there was really a need to skirt emergency procurement. Really, emergency procurement is you get 3 quotes, right? And you choose the one that's going to best satisfy the need. It can't get simpler than that. To have to be able to go around that 3 price quotes for something that is needed, that can happen very quickly.
Yeah, and we saw that after this whole scandal, is that they gave the procurement over to Homeland Security and Civil Defense, and they did it the way it's supposed to be done. And here we are celebrating return to normal. So it's not like them doing the procurement the right way impeded any of the COVID-19 response. So that kind of that argument's out the window.
Right, and in looking at the documents, they were focusing on condemnation of a hotel. And so, of course, that's going to take a little longer. If they had focused on just the emergency procurement process alone, they probably would have gotten that done and not have to go through this alternate route. So yes, I agree with that statement that it looks like they're backtracking as far as finding a legal interpretation that fits the steps that were taken.
Right. Maybe I'll pose this question to Attorney Brown and you as well, Senator, but it's a question I asked the public auditor. What are the actionable items with this? I mean, if the public auditor in this audit is saying that the procurement law was basically broken and there was a conflict of interest and all these other items mentioned in the audit, will there be a forwarding of these findings to the Attorney General for possible prosecution? And do you think that prosecution is something that could be done or justified in this case?
So,
go ahead.
So yeah, I think that question was brought up with the public auditor. That is one of the possibilities, but in looking at some of the documents, and going back at the oversight hearing, the Attorney General was involved in procurement, so it would be difficult to have to investigate something which you were involved in, I think. So it maybe require a more of an independent review.
Right. Well, I think there's a whole process for that, probably. Attorney Brown, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say that in the procurement law itself, there's really no crimes for violating it. There are ethics rules that can be enforced, but the only people that can do that is the Civil Service Commission against government employees. So, you know, what do they know about the procurement aspects of all of this, and how are they going to get about it? And again, you don't do time for that sort of thing. But they're outside of the procurement law and outside of the criminal law. There's a fascinating law on Guam, has been on Guam for a long time, and it's called the Enforcement of Proper Government Spending. Let me just read to you, if I can spend a couple seconds doing this, the legislative intent of this. It's the intent of the legislature that the government of Guam practice fiscal responsibility, and that the person who spend the taxpayers' money follow the mandates of law in expending government funds. Historically, there have been many instances of government officials in the government of Guam spending and obligating money without appropriation or contrary to law. Since the Attorney General is the only officer empowered to bring court actions to control such illegal spending, and the only officer who can represent the government in recovering such money, and since the Attorney General is an appointed member of the governor's cabinet, laws relating to improper spending of funds by the executive branch have generally not been enforced, and in some instances have been openly ignored. So there is this law where they're taking this duty to be a fiduciary of the government's funds to hand, and what they've done is they've outsourced the punishment, if you will, of spending money contrary to law. It says any taxpayer who is a resident of Guam shall have standing to sue the government of Guam and any officer of the executive branch for the purpose of enjoining any officer of the executive branch from expending money contrary to law, and to obtain a personal judgment in the courts of Guam against such officers, not for themselves, but in favor of the government of Guam, to make them return the money to Gov Guam. And for purposes of this chapter, the governor and lieutenant governor of Guam are officers of the government of Guam. So step right up, folks. Take a number. Everybody, choose one and sue away.
Hear ye, hear ye.
Wow.
So it's not like they can't be done, but if people are going to complain about it, step up and put your money where your mouth is. Put Gov Guam's money where your mouth is.
Senator, it kind of just seems like, I don't want to say that they got away with it, but I mean the legal counsel who orchestrated and led this whole questionable quarantine procurement doesn't even work for the government of Guam anymore. So what is the remedy for the taxpayers and the people of Guam?
They get money back if they do this. I just
You did present the remedy, right? Yeah.
Let me just, we're talking to the right person at the moment, but let me just inform that discussion. The senators and the Guam legislature have standing to sue under this chapter, the law I was just talking about. The legislative council may, as part of the duties, represent the members of the legislature. So, you know, the legislature can do this as well with a lot more authority, because they have the entrails of all the documents. I don't know. If I had them, I wouldn't go through them. I don't have the time for all that.
So, Senator, does that mean you guys are going to be filing suit?
I would have to take a look and see. Yeah, let me go over the information.
Right.
But thank you for that.
Jace, if you could post the link to the law that Attorney Brown was referring to,
Yeah.
for people who want to look at it. I just sent it over to him. This is Title 5?
This is Title 5, Chapter 7.
Got it.
Yeah, well, again, there's the remedy. If, if money has been misspent, that would be the remedy to achieve it. And I know the public auditor is also doing additional studies, I believe, having to do with the expenditures as well.
He said 48 million. Oh my goodness.
I know he said 48 million for the purchase orders, right?
Right,
So,
right, yeah.
there's 3 million, I think, questionable cost.
Senator,
There's their audit.
if I could, it's almost like a broken record. We have you on so many times about procurement issues and procurement questions, but I want to say that this was the case even before the pandemic. So why do we have such a problem with just following basic procurement law?
I think some of the circumstances, the urgency of this was kind of threw us into this perfect storm where we have people who are not qualified, and then we have a sudden urgency to procure these quarantine facilities. So I know during the oversight hearing, Mary Rhodes brought up another process called letter contracts, and this is something the military does in cases like this, where there's a sudden urgency to procure something. And so that one is, it's a little bit more flexible. You have verbal agreements followed up with a contract prior to money being dispersed. And this is something that could be revisited as far as, should we come across a similar situation, this might work for those cases only. Again, the laws are also being reformed. Currently we reformed the emergency procurement law. Before it was 30 days, now it's 90 days. And should an agency want to extend, they would have to have a public hearing. So those are some of the changes, and there are potential other legislative fixes too that can address any kind of loopholes in regards to this process called emergency purchasing. And I think also training's utmost importance. Again, another audit that the public auditor came out with is, a lot of people working in agency that are doing procurement, or there's a lack of people with expertise that are qualified for procurement. And so that needs to be addressed. And I believe, GCC has started up their courses again, ensuring that all there's a fair distribution or equal distribution amongst the different agencies to take the courses. So, I guess slowly but surely we are addressing it, and as well as the budget cycle. So what do we need to do to fund GSA to ensure that they have enough staff on board, to ensure that these procurement records are being, completed, the process is being followed. So it is a multi-pronged approach again. So it's not a single bullet, silver bullet that's going to.
It's more of like a Rambo style. It's a lot of bullets because it's a lot of problems.
Well, I'd like to make an observation about also how we got onto this wrong foot to begin with. I think that the governor was ill-informed about what the emergency powers were. They don't have any of the powers that they're alleging that they have. And I've made this point to you before on this program some time ago, that it does not give them the right to disregard a law. It gives them the right to disregard a regulation. But regulations can't be disregarded if it violates the law. So the only thing that the governor has in this emergency power is to suspend a regulatory statute prescribing procedures for conducting local business. If it's not that kind of a statute, that's the only statute that they have to deal with, and it's just to suspend it. It's not to ignore it for all time. And I think that whoever read it the way they wanted to read it. That does talk about as a parenthetical thought that they can suspend the regulation that may delay necessary action, including emergency purchases. So it doesn't give them the power to make emergency purchases. It just gives them the power to suspend the emergency law, that regulations that we have, but it can't can't suspend regulations when the law says this is how you're going to do it. So, you know, there's just a refusal to read reality, and that often happens in a crisis. People make quick reactions.
Well, thank you, Senator. Thank you, Attorney Brown. I guess we'll check you when the next audit comes out.
Yeah. And GCC's back to giving those classes. I'm in the middle of one now, and I got one coming up at the end of the month.
Guys, just take the damn procurement class. There are former legal counsels everywhere. Go and sign up for Attorney John Brown's class. You'll thank us later.
All right, thank you, Senator Perez, Attorney Brown.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Sabina.
Senator, we'll catch up with you next week because I know there's a bunch of other issues under your oversight that we wanted to talk about.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Attorney Brown. Always a pleasure.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep. A lot of fun.
See you.
Again, the link